Where are fingers pointing when there is a cyber incident? This is a never-ending debate. Welcome to Cyber Day is monthly cyber conversation. I am Richard Perry, and in today's conversation will be a shared responsibility model for cloud security as a means of reinforcing what companies need to know about their security responsibility while operating in a cloud infrastructure environment. And our intent today is not to join the blame game or the finger pointing, but rather to establish and to address the situation from a strategic perspective. And this conversation is sparked by the Snowflake data breach, and many of you might be aware of this incident. And when these incidents do happen, and there have been many, there's always finger pointing, especially at the end users or the well known CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. Why is this the case, or should this be the case? Are some of the questions to ponder and some of the questions that we'll be actually addressing in this conversation. So, to weigh in on this conversation, we have our valuable experts, Paul Robbins and Jonathan Fisher. Guys, thanks for joining as usual. But before we actually jump into the subject at hand, um, can you guys please share some amount of details for our audience about this incident that was suffered by Snowflake that led to a data breach?
Yeah, I know everything is still kind of in flux, the situation's in flux, and concrete information is still coming out, but apparently, what had happened was is Snowflake as a data tool had experienced a cyber incident that impacted customers that were using their tools. The who, what, where, when, how is still being figured out. But Rashay, I think you bring up a really good point in the finger pointing piece of it, and I think the first thing foundationally that I want to address is cloud services are good. They help our organizations to be more nimble, to move quicker, to transmit data quicker, to access applications quicker. But um, what I think people need to understand is the cloud provider is responsible for securing the cloud in which data is residing, but the data that the customer puts in there is ultimately the responsibility of the company that's putting the data up there. I think in its most simplistic forms, that's the foundational thing that I wanted to get out, because I think a lot of people are confused with the cloud, that if you put the data in there, and something were to happen, that it's the cloud provider's responsibility. In some cases, it is. We'll get into end user license agreements in a little bit, but understanding that the data still is the responsibility of the client that's putting the data in the cloud repository, or the applications that are going up there as well.
Yep, I will agree with that. The whole thing about the cloud is that shared responsibility model, right? And keyword is shared responsibility, right? The cloud provider has some responsibilities. You as a customer has certain responsibilities, and it's unfair to look at either one of them as pushing off their responsibility onto the other, right? And that works both ways, right? For most of the time, it's the customer wanting to just push off the responsibility of their data to the provider. But it can also go the other way, where the provider maybe wants to push off some of the key infrastructure controls off to the customer. You don't really see that often, but it could be possible, especially when it's ones where you need to have a higher licensing or a higher level of a subscription for the certain controls, and the customer is not fully aware of that, right? Again, still comes down to that customer understanding the model, understanding what services are provided at each level. But the big key is that it's shared. Um, the big old saying is that I think you just said it, Paul, that the provider is responsible for security of the cloud, while the customer is responsible for the security of the data and everything in the cloud. So with a finger pointing, right? Like I always like to tell my kids, when you start pointing a finger at someone, most of the time you got 2 or 3 fingers pointing right back at you. So it's always
Exactly.
important when you're looking at these examples, looking at after action reviews, and trying to put that into your own business and your own controls of your company, right? If you want to start pointing fingers, take a look around at what you might be responsible for.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I mean, great points. But one of the things that really, I mean, surprise, well, maybe not surprises, or surprises me is the fact that, I mean, I've had a similar experience. I mean, back in the past as it relates to maybe not on a large scale as it relates to a cyber incident. I mean, we deciding to that organization deciding to actually create an hybrid environment. But at times when these things happen, it's almost like it's a case of who actually knows who is responsible or what are the responsibilities. I mean, in often situations I'm experiencing where, for example, the stakeholders, the executives, the various directors, board members, the powers that be for these organizations really do not understand, or they have that impression of the cloud that once everything is inside the cloud, all is safe. It's the cloud's responsibility. We are operating efficiently. It's almost this ideology of the cloud being that safe and well bred environment. So it comes to the question of how well is this being communicated in terms of the responsibilities? That's one. And also, how do we as security leaders actually ensures that the responsibilities are actually understood by the relevant stakeholders in these scenarios when things happen, so that some amount of possible policies or procedures or some legal ramification or understanding or legislation or something is in place to actually address the issues when they do take place. Because I'm really getting that we have this thing happening so many times, and they continues to be that blame game. Oh, it's the end users. Oh, it's the CISO. Where do we actually draw that line in terms of actually coming to that point where we can say, okay, these are the established, understood roles and responsibility depending on the type of services that are being used in the cloud environment.
Yeah, it's interesting how this points back actually to third party risk management. We talk about third party risk a lot in our industry. I'd say the last 12 months, it's really just become a big topic, and people don't really know how to understand it. Rashay, you talk about legalities around it. More often than not, the terms and conditions of shared responsibility are in the master services agreement or non-disclosure agreements that are signed by both parties before entering into a business relationship. But I think the foundational problem is time. I think that's a big thing, and who is taking responsibility on the purchasing side of reviewing the documents to understand what shared responsibility or limited responsibility would be. CISOs are under a tremendous amount of stress these days because they're being asked to do technical things, as well as business process items as well. And the CISO is probably the most well equipped to review this document and pick out what's going on, and to be able to kind of do a summary for the organization of what the risk is. But when you have a CISO that's running phishing campaigns for awareness training, or plugging in firewalls, or fighting with HR as to why they're blocking a certain application, they don't have the time to review these documents. So this is a very, very important case that can be useful in a lot of organizations. But one is, this is ammunition for a CISO to say, listen, I need time to review these things, so when this does happen, we're well prepared to know what's going on. I say all the time, I've been involved in enough cyber incidents and legally determined breaches to know that the two worst questions you can ask in a situation like this is, how did this happen, and why did we not know about this? And when you ask those questions, and you're not dealing with the incident at that point, you're now dealing pre-incident to even get to the point of current state of the environment. So I think it's very important for CISOs that are out there that are struggling with time, to use this as an example of, this is why I need time to understand where we're at, because when it does happen, we have to be legally defensible. We have to respond and recover as quick as possible. I want to focus in on that, and not the how and the why this happened.
Yeah, and it comes down to the size of the organization, right? I mean, obviously, the way Paul was talking about it, sounds like that's folks with an organization that's very small, that maybe has a small security team, that the CISO is the one that's really running a lot of the shows. In that case, time is the enemy. Time is not there. They could try to do different things, such as bring in one of the other people on the team to at least discuss it, so that way there's at least a two-person who has eyes on it to maybe try to take care of it. But again, in a small organization, those other people have their own jobs and their own responsibilities to do. But then if you look at other organizations that are huge, sometimes the CISO might not even know everything that's going on. Right? I mean, in my organization, we're so huge, we have so many people on different teams, that I've actually been a part of working with contract people, trying to look at statements of work that we're creating, to ensure that there's the certain cyber requirements within it. And then I am participating on selection review boards for the vendors that we pick. Right? So the CISO has no idea about this. And when I say no idea, he's kind of delegated that responsibility to other people to do it, right? So the organizations that have the ability to do this, or have bigger teams, I definitely believe in kind of having a CAB, right, a change advisory board that can review the vendors, review everything, right, have time to talk about it. Ultimately, yeah, the CISO is going to be responsible, right, because he is one of the higher ranking officers within the organization. But hopefully he has enough trust, or he or she has enough trust, that they can delegate that authority and that responsibility to someone who they feel can best represent them, right? And be able to, turn around, and if there's an issue or a concern about a certain vendor, bring that up to the CISO, so that way they can bring it up higher, or bring it to, any contract specialist or the acquisition process, to kind of, limit, the decision to make bad choices. So, each time, I think the big key is not just leaving it to one person, right? We're going to oversaturate someone. The mind can only do so much. If you're in a small organization and you're relying on the CISO to take care of all that, that sometimes you should pause and look at the processes that you have and how you can improve it. So that way it's not just, hanging over one person's head, and the responsibility is going to be pointed at one single person.
Yeah, and I think shared responsibility is actually an internal thing as well. So if you look at I forgot the number and letters of the clause in ISO 27001, but there is a clause in there that says that you have to have a security council internally there, or a security group that meets and works together. And some of the healthiest organizations that I've seen from a cyber perspective are the ones where HR, your sales department, your operations department are security literate, so they can help with the levels of responsibility. I was in a meeting one time, and somebody said, oh, and they had a whole bunch of different departments around the table. I said, okay, who's in charge of data security? And everybody pointed to the CISO, and the guy was like, nope, it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. Everybody is responsible for data security inside of this organization. It was an organization of about 5,000 people. And Jonathan, you're absolutely right to, we want to throw around, why do CISOs not sleep at night? And that's one of the things. If you're in charge for the security of 5,000 people, that's not going to lend itself to a very comfortable life. So, organizations that can understand the roles and responsibilities of each department as it pertains to cybersecurity, that'd be important for sales. If you lose your client list and it goes to your competitor, that's a bad day for you. HR, if personal records or corrective action forms are put in public internet of employees, that's a bad day for you. So getting everybody to understand what their roles and responsibilities are in cyber and risk really helps to alleviate the stress and the pressure of a CISO, and can actually act as soldiers under his or her command.
Yeah, I totally agree with all. You guys have actually said it, but I'm actually thinking about the fact that we all would love to have that ideal environment in which the
Mhm.
executives, the end users, all the stakeholders, they understand what the risks are, they understand the the terms and conditions of these. Shared responsibilities. But we know that the reality is that is definitely not the case. We have seen this. I've actually experienced this, where you have these meetings, you establish what the conditions are, you establish what the responsibilities are. But at the end of the day, when something actually happens as it relates to these incidents, pretty much no one is available. As you have rightly said, you went in that room. That CISO was like, who was responsible for um, XYZ, and everyone was pointing at the CISO. It's almost like people eventually forget about what their role is. As long as it has to do with information security or information technology, then it's the CISO or the IT guys. So, how do we, try to have a better word in terms of protect ourselves as security leaders in organization, as it relates to ensuring that when these incidents do actually occur in an organization, then it's people really understand that it's not about the CISO anymore, but it's a risk to the organization that has been established, and that the risk appetite of the organization or the decisions about risk is not solely on the CISO. The CISO role, well, part of the role is to make the risk known, and then the relevant stakeholders decide on what mitigation strategies they are going to invest in. So, how do we actually, protect ourselves in terms of actually establishing that what I would describe as ideal, strategy?
Yeah, from a personal perspective, if you're in senior leadership when it comes to cybersecurity, to protect yourself on the front end, document everything. Have these meetings documented, email, time and date stamped. I have a CISO that I know very well that was in a company where none of the recommendations, none of the items were being even considered. Like they were just being flat out ignored, and they documented every last thing because they were like, if something were to go down, I know I'm going to be blamed, and I'm going to just have a trove of information that will protect myself personally, internally, from that perspective. as far as the other piece that you say of how to get, people say, okay, what are characteristics that you need from a CISO or senior leadership in security? You hear leadership qualities and program management. Sales is actually one of the biggest skills that you can have as a CISO, because you actually have to sell the plan. When we elect an official, whether it's state, local, federal, they go out and they start to sell an initiative that they have. They can't just sit back and say, well, I'm going to reform schools or I'm going to reform healthcare. They have to get buy-in from a whole bunch of different people from different parts of the states that have different theories and thoughts and ideologies around the subject. So it's getting that buy-in. The only way you can get that buy-in is if you sell it in a way that a person can understand it. So one thing that I encourage CISOs that I talk to and work with is really like look at presenting your program as a sales exercise. And the employees and executive leadership, they're your clients, they're your prospects, or your opportunities that you're trying to sell to, and hit them where they're at. Like I said, the sales department might hate having MFA on all their devices. And if they just look at it like that, of course they're going to hate it. But if you say, hey, if we don't have this and the risk is increased exponentially for you to lose your customer list or your opportunities list, and it could go into the hands of your competitors, and you have no one to sell to or to account manage, then you start to gain their attention. Or if it's the finance department and the CFO, what if our war chest was depleted, we had no money to pay employees or to keep the lights on in the building. um, those are ways that you can sell the program. So those are the two things that I would say.
Yeah,
Okay.
for my organization, it's interesting because we kind of had an incident that we lost data, and ways that we have been going through to respond to try to educate is by creating a cloud service owner's manual and training. So that way, I mean, because I'm in an organization that has over 6,000 people spread out over multiple, different type of organizations, and me being one of the GRC policy analysts for a cloud team of about 3 people, we can't manage every single cloud instance within our organization. So we are creating a training program that's helping the person who's going to be responsible for that application understand their responsibilities, what they should be in charge of. Right, we're going to have a manual so they can reflect back to that. It's something that also reflects back onto that training. And we have been documenting stuff, but now we're even documenting even more. Right, so if it's something that's like a pass or IS, we definitely have the documentation of their controls. But for applications that are truly SaaS, and all we have to do is really just ensure that there's MFA, or what we're doing with the data, right? We're even documenting that even down to the smallest little type of controls, so that way we can show them and help that service owner understand what they're responsible for. It's not our responsibility as the security professionals, but we're here to help them, right? As we've talked before, the data comes down to whoever that owner is. And you look at any of the training and certification stuff, as people learn, it's always in there that the data is the data owner. It's not the security person, it's not the CISO, it's the data owner that's ultimately responsible for that data. So we're trying to take a more proactive approach in ensuring that whoever is listed as that data owner understands their responsibility, and we're there to help them understand how to implement those controls to help them stay in that compliance.
Great. Um, I'm just thinking. I mean, what can be done to really, I mean, change this perspective in terms of having that blame game situation? Because I mean, I've seen so many cases whereby, I mean, it's sad to say that you have these conversations, these policies, agreements are understood by the various individuals. And at the highest level, at the end of the day, when these incidents do occur, it's almost like these conversations were never had in the first place. So that's also another thing to deal with. So I think that a very important point that Paul has actually mentioned in terms of having those documentations at every step of the way in terms of everything that has been discussed as it relates to the risk associated with actually um, investing in a cloud service or cloud service providers environment. So often I'm seeing whereby we have, for example, a cloud service provider might sell a particular service to an organization, but for example, the executives, management, board of management, whoever it is, really do not understand what it is that they're really getting involved in. As far as they know, is that they have this wonderful, shiny tool called the code, and all is running fine. Their systems are up. They're able to deliver the necessary services to their customers. But when something really happens, um, it's always that challenge of we did not understand, or we are unable to really come to that conclusion as to why this actually took place in the first place. I'm actually even seeing whereby the cloud service provider is saying that no, it's not our responsibility, it's your responsibility. And I think that's where the challenge is on the executive, is that once a breach or an incident takes place in the cloud, then it's the guys who sold us that service. They are at fault. They are the one that allows the bad guys to get into their environments to affect our environment. So I think there needs to be a simplification of communication between the cloud service providers and the companies or business that are actually engaging their services, so that there's an established understanding or playbook amongst all parties and stakeholders involved to create that level playing field and understanding. And that this is something that is reinforced over a period of time, so that even to have a reminder, a refresher of what the responsibilities are, I think that will go a far way as it relates to the risk, that surrounds operating in a cloud environment. So, all are there any final words on this pointing of fingers?
Right. One thing I think that would be very interesting, and I know Paul just had to drop for another meeting, but one
Yeah.
thing I think that would be interesting to help within the organization, right? The data owner is when it comes to doing a tabletop exercise to actually blame that service owner or blame the data owner for it instead of pointing the finger at the CISO, to try to be like, have the CISO run it and be pointing the finger back at that data owner, right? Because people really don't take it seriously until they feel the effects. So if you, yeah, it's still a tabletop exercise, but if you actually put that blame on them, I wonder if they would start taking a little bit more ownership, right? And having the CISO or one of the security professionals go through the different controls that they had, and why did they implement other things, right? That's just in obscure thinking, and an object that I've been thinking about like in the last day or two. How can we make these owners, within the organization own that application to really understand the importance of providing it. It might work. It might be an interesting exercise instead of the typical, everyone just sits around and just talks, but really stress the importance, not towards the CISO, but towards everyone else at that exercise.
Yeah, that's a awesome note to end on. I think a very good thing is actually uh, an overall understanding of risk at every single, for all employees at every
Mhm.
single level. And I always like to simplify it to the fact that regardless of who you are in the organization, always bearing in mind that whatever you do, there are actions. Once you do not act within a certain, I mean, best practice in terms of whatever it is that you're
Mhm.
doing, always think of the impact to your job, your salary, your ability to earn. So it's not just about doing your job, but it's about everyone being able to take care of the families. That holistic approach to, I mean, responsibility as it relates to those associated risk. So, guys, I think that's, I mean, that's enough for us to, I mean, end this conversation on. And I just end on this note that blaming end users or the CISO oversimplifies the complex nature of cybersecurity. A holistic approach involving all levels of an organization and its partners is necessary to effectively manage and mitigate cyber risk. Security is a shared responsibility that requires commitment and action from everyone within the organization. So, guys, thanks for your valuable time and sharing your insights with our audience. I mean, to everyone else, that's it from us on Cyber JA. See you in our next monthly cyber conversation. And as usual, please share this with your network as we seek to build our cyber community. All right, guys, take
Thanks.
care.
Thanks again for being here. We'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Take care.